The piano had been sitting there for weeks, maybe longer. Most people no longer noticed it. It rested near the wide-open space of the station, its black surface dull from fingerprints and dust. A small sign leaned against one leg, inviting anyone to play. At first, people had been curious. Children pressed keys at random. Teenagers tried short tunes while laughing. But over time, the piano became part of the background, like the echo of footsteps or the distant sound of trains arriving and leaving. That afternoon, the crowd was larger than usual. It was one of those days when everyone seemed to be in a hurry. The air felt heavy, filled with noise-rolling suitcases. Announcements over the speaker, phones ringing, people talking over one another. Some were tired from travel. Some were stressed from work. Others were simply bored, waiting for time to pass. No one was expecting anything special. People walked past the piano without slowing down. A few glanced at it, then looked away. A man leaned against a pillar nearby, scrolling on his phone. A group of friends laughed loudly, arguing about where to eat. An older woman sat on a bench, staring straight ahead, her thoughts far away. Life moved on at its usual speed. Then she appeared. She did not stand out. That was the first thing no one noticed. She was dressed simply, in clothes that blended in with the crowd. Nothing bright, nothing bold. Her shoes showed signs of wear, like they had walked many long roads. Her hair was pulled back without care, not styled to impress anyone. She walked slowly, not because she was weak, but because she seemed unsure. She carried nothing in her hands. No bag, no phone. Just herself, as she moved through the crowd, no heads turned. No one stopped talking. No one whispered. She could have been anyone. Another face in a busy place. She stopped when she reached the piano. For a moment, she stood there, looking at it. Not like someone curious, but like someone meeting an old memory. Her shoulders rose slightly as she took a breath. Her fingers twitched, as if they already remembered something her mind was still catching up to. A few people noticed her pause but did not think much of it. Someone might play, they thought. Or maybe she would just walk away like so. Many others had. She did not walk away. She reached out and touched the edge of the piano. Her hand rested there longer than needed. The surface was cold. She closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. Nearby, a man glanced over and sighed quietly. Another player, he thought. Probably a few loud notes, maybe a song half remembered. He adjusted his headphones, but did not press play yet. The woman sat down on the bench. The bench creaked softly under her weight. The sound was small, but it cut through the noise for just a second. She adjusted her position, pulling herself closer to the keys. Her feet rested flat on the ground. Her back was straight, but not stiff. She did not rush. That alone was unusual. Most people who tried the piano were quick. They wanted attention or laughs. They wanted to prove something fast. She did nothing fast. Her hands hovered above the keys. She did not touch them yet. Her fingers were thin, marked by small lines and faint scars. Hands that had worked, not just played. Hands that had known effort. She flexed them slowly, as if warming them up, even though the air was not cold. Around her, the crowd kept moving. Someone bumped into another person and muttered an apology. A child cried. An announcement echoed through the hall, calling for passengers to board. Still, she waited. Her eyes stayed on the keys, but her mind seemed far away. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere only she could see. People began to notice the delay. A few looks were thrown her way. Not with interest, but with mild annoyance. If she was going to play, then play. If not, move. Someone whispered, "Is she going to do something?" Another person shrugged. Probably doesn't know how. The words were not meant to be cruel. They were casual, careless. The kind of words people say when they do not think. They are being heard. She heard nothing. Or maybe she heard everything and chose to ignore it. She lifted her hands slightly higher, then lowered them again. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. In that moment, the noise around her seemed to fade, not because it was gone, but because she no longer let it reach her. It was as if she had built a small, quiet space round herself in the middle of chaos. Her fingers finally touched the keys, but she did not press them. She rested her fingertips there, feeling the smooth surface, the familiar distance between each note. It was like greeting an old friend after many years apart, someone you once knew deeply, but had not seen in a long time. Her lips pressed together gently. There was something heavy in her chest. Not fear exactly. Something deeper. Expectation. Not from the crowd. From herself. The piano had been a part of her life once. A big part. Long hours. Quiet rooms. Moments of joy mixed with moments of frustration. It had seen her best days and her worst ones. It had heard things no one else ever did. Life, however, had not stayed kind. Time had pulled her away. Responsibility, loss, silence. The piano had become something she remembered instead of something she lived. Until now she swallowed and placed her fingers in position. A man nearby glanced again, curious despite himself. Something about her stillness made him pause. She did not look nervous in the way beginners do. There was no shaking, no rushing. She looked focused. A woman sitting across the hall stopped scrolling on her phone. She watched without knowing why. The moment stretched. Someone coughed. Then finally the first key was pressed. The sound was soft. Almost too soft to notice. It did not demand attention. It did not shout for the room to listen. It simply existed. A single note, then another. They were clean, steady, controlled. The sound moved through the air gently, weaving between voices and footsteps. Some people did not hear it at all. Others heard it without realizing they had. The woman continued. Her hands moved slowly, carefully. Each note placed with purpose. There was no rush to impress. No sudden finesse. Just intention. The man with the headphones paused before pressing play. He frowned slightly, listening. The group of friends nearby lowered their voices without noticing they had done so. The music was still quiet, but it carried weight. It felt different from the random noise people were used to. It felt like the beginning of something. She played as if she was alone. Her face remained calm, but her eyes were alive. They followed her hands, then lifted slightly, as if she was seeing something beyond the piano. The notes flowed gently now, forming a simple pattern. Nothing complex. Nothing showy, but honest. Someone in the crowd shifted their bag from one shoulder to the other, stopped walking. Another person turned around fully. Surprised by their own reaction, no one clapped. No one spoke. Not yet. The crowd still expected nothing. They had no idea. What was about to unfold? The first notes were gentle. Almost shy, but they did not stop. They continued one after another, steady and calm. The woman's hands moved with care like they were following a path they already knew. There was no rush, no sudden change. Just a quiet flow that felt personal. Like a thought spoken out loud for the first time. At first the crowd did not react much. People still walked past. A few glanced over, then kept going. In a place like this, sound was everywhere. Music from phones, voices, footsteps, rolling wheels. One soft piano did not seem important, but slowly something changed. The sound began to stand apart. Not louder, but clearer. It slipped through the noise instead of fighting it. The notes rose and fell like breathing. Anyone who truly listened could feel that this was not random playing. The man with the headphones frowned again. He had paused his music without realizing it. His finger hovered over the screen, but he didn't press play. He tilted his head slightly, trying to catch the melody. A woman walking quickly toward the exit slowed down. She told herself it was only for a second, just long enough to hear where the tune was going. Her steps became shorter. Then she stopped. The piano bench creaked softly as the woman shifted her weight. Her shoulders loosened more now. The stiffness she had carried earlier was fading. Her fingers moved with greater confidence. Pressing deeper into the keys, the sound grew warmer. It was still simple, but it carried feeling. There was a quiet sadness in it, mixed with something hopeful, like remembering a hard time, but knowing it had passed. A few people nearby exchanged looks. "Who's playing?" Someone whispered, "No idea." Another replied. Keeping their voice low, a small group formed without anyone planning it. 2 people stood closer to the piano, then 3, and more. They didn't crowd her. They just stopped moving. Drawn in without knowing why, the woman at the bench did not look up. She stayed focused on the keys. Her face showed calm, but her eyes held something deeper. Memories moved through her, quiet and fast. Late nights, empty rooms, a piano that once felt like home. In the long silence that followed when life pulled her away, her left hand kept a steady rhythm while her right hand began to wander, exploring higher notes. The melody lifted, then settled again. A child tugged at their parent's sleeve. "Listen," the child said softly. The parent nodded, surprised by how still the child had become. A man who had earlier leaned against a pillar put his phone in his pocket. He folded his arms and listened. His face softened, though he did not know why. The woman playing took a deeper breath. Her fingers moved faster now, not rushed, but sure. The notes came together in a way that felt complete, like a story beginning to take shape. Some people expected her to make a mistake. That was the thought many had at first. Anyone could start strong. Anyone could press a few keys that sounded nice. But sooner or later, they thought, would fall apart. It didn't. The music held. Her hands moved smoothly from one section to the next. There was control in every movement. Even the pauses felt planned, like she knew exactly when to let the sound rest. A low murmur spread through the crowd. "She's good," someone said. Another replied, "Yeah, she really is." No one laughed. No one doubted anymore. The woman's posture changed as she played. She sat taller now, not from pride, but from comfort. This was familiar. This was where she belonged. Her fingers told a story her mouth never had. They spoke of struggle without anger, of loss without bitterness, of strength without needing to prove anything. The station seemed to slow down. Announcements still echoed, but they felt distant. Footsteps softened. Conversations dropped to whispers. People who had no reason to stop found themselves standing still, bags hanging from their arms, eyes fixed on the piano. Some filmed quietly. Others didn't dare move. The woman's hands moved across the keys with growing ease. The melody deepened, adding layers. Not complicated ones, just enough to show depth. A few notes dipped lower, heavier. The sound carried weight now. It filled the open space in a way that surprised everyone listening. The man with the headphones closed his eyes. He had not done that in years. Across the room, the older woman on the bench shifted forward. Her eyes glistened. The music reminded her of something she could not name. A feeling from long ago. The player's face remained calm. But inside, something was opening. She had not played like this in public before. Not in a long time. Fear had kept her quiet. Fear of being judged. Fear of failing. Fear of remembering too much. But now, fear loosened its grip. Each note made her braver. She pressed the keys with more confidence. The sound grew fuller. Still gentle, but stronger. Like a voice finding its volume, the crowd leaned in. Almost without realizing it, a few steps closer, then a few more. No one spoke. No. One interrupted. The woman's hands began to dance across the keys. Not wildly, gracefully, like they were finally free. The music shifted slightly. A new feeling entered. Hope. Quiet but steady. Some listeners smiled. Others swallowed hard. The sound touched places they didn't expect. A man wiped his eye quickly and looked away, embarrassed. A woman placed a hand over her mouth. The player felt the room now, not with her eyes, but with her heart. She could sense the stillness, the attention, the shared silence. It did not distract her. It lifted her. She was no longer invisible, but she was not playing for them. She was playing for The notes climbed higher, brighter. They hovered for a moment, then drifted back down. The melody wrapped around the room, gentle but firm. A few people held their breath. The piano no longer sounded. It's like background noise. It sounded like truth. As the last notes of this section faded, the woman did not stop. She let the silence breathe for just a second, then continued. The crowd waited. They did not expect nothing anymore. They expected more, and they were ready to listen. The music no longer felt like it belonged to a public place. It felt private, like something meant for a quiet room and a closed door, and yet it filled the open space completely. People stood still, caught between leaving and staying, unsure why they could not move. The woman's hands moved with purpose now. There was no hesitation left. Each note flowed into the next, smooth and certain. The melody grew deeper, richer, as if it was opening a door that had been locked for a long time. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the music. Slow when the notes softened, strong when they rose. She leaned slightly forward, fully present, fully connected. Around her, faces changed. The man with the headphones lowered his head, eyes still closed. He had forgotten where he was. For him, the station no longer existed. There was only sound and memory. The older woman on the bench pressed her lips together. Her hands trembled faintly in her lap. The music reminded her of evenings long ago, of a piano in a small house, of someone she loved who was no longer there. A young couple stood side by side, fingers brushing without realizing it. The music softened the space. Between them, the woman playing did not see any of this, or maybe she felt it without looking. Her fingers dipped into lower notes now, heavier and slower. The sound carried weight, like footsteps walking through difficult days. The melody darkened, not in anger, but in honesty. This was the part she knew best. Struggle the years when music had faded from her life came rushing back. Long days filled with responsibility, nights too tired for dreams. Moments when she passed pianos without stopping, afraid of what they might remind her of. Her hands shook once, just once, but they did not stop. She pressed on, letting the feeling move through her instead of fighting it. The piano answered her touch faithfully, every key responding like it had been waiting. The crowd sensed the shift. The air felt heavier, quieter. Even the usual sounds of the station seemed to step back. People leaned in slightly, drawn closer by the emotion they could not name. Few listeners felt their chests tighten. Others felt a warmth behind their eyes. The woman's face remained calm, but her jaw tightened for a moment. She swallowed and continued. This part of the music was not meant to impress. It was meant to tell the truth. Her left hand kept a slow, steady pattern, like time passing no matter what. Her right hand traced the melody above it, sometimes gentle, sometimes heavy. The notes spoke of giving up, then standing again, of silence, of loss. Someone near the edge of the crowd shifted their weight. Suddenly uncomfortable with how much they felt, a man whispered, "This is different." No one replied. The woman's shoulders rose with a deep breath. She straightened slightly, as if gathering strength. The melody began to change. It lifted not all at once. Slowly the lower notes softened. The rhythm grew lighter. The sound began to open, like clouds breaking after a long storm. Her fingers moved higher up the keyboard, exploring brighter tones. The heaviness did not disappear, but it no longer controlled the music. Hope entered quietly. A woman near the front smiled through tears she did not realize had fallen. The child who had listened earlier leaned closer. Eyes wide, the player felt it too. Something easing, something healing. Each note felt like a step forward. Not away from the past, but through it. The music carried acceptance, not regret. She remembered why she had loved the piano in the first place. Not for praise, not for attention, but for moments like this. Moments. When sound said what words could not, the melody grew fuller, stronger. Her hands moved with confidence and grace. The piano responded with a richness that filled every corner of the space. The crowd stood. It's completely still now. No phones rang. No one spoke. Time seemed to stretch. The woman leaned into the music, letting it guide her. The fear that once held her back felt distant now, small. She was no longer playing to see. If she still could, she knew she could. A few listeners exchanged looks of disbelief. They had expected noise. They had expected nothing. They were receiving something real. The music reached a gentle peak, then softened again. The notes floated light and careful. Like a fragile promise, the woman's fingers slowed, not to end, but to breathe. The silence between notes became part of the song. People held their breath. The older woman on the bench wiped her eyes openly now. She did not care who saw. The man with the headphones opened his eyes, blinking as if waking from a dream. The player's face softened. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. She kept playing. This moment was too important. She pressed one key slightly harder than the rest. The sound rang clear and true. It felt like a turning point, like the place where everything changes. The melody shifted once more, preparing for something bigger. The energy in the room changed with it. People sensed it without knowing how. Something was building. Something powerful. The woman straightened her back and lifted, her hands just enough to let the notes ring. The crowd leaned in. No one expected anything anymore. They were ready for whatever came next. The shift in the music was clear now. What had begun as something quiet and careful was turning into something bold. Not loud for the sake of noise, but strong with meaning. The woman's hands moved with confidence she had not felt in years. Each note landed where it belonged, like steps on solid ground after a long walk through uncertainty. The air in the station felt different. People sensed it, even those who had just arrived. They slowed as they entered, confused by the stillness. A few stopped in their tracks, unsure why a busy place felt so calm. The woman at the piano lifted her hands slightly, then brought them down together. The sound grew fuller. The melody expanded, spreading wide through the space. It carried warmth now, and strength. It no longer sounded like a memory. It sounded like a decision. Her shoulders relaxed as she played. Her back stayed straight, steady. The fear that once sat heavy in her chest was gone. In its place was focus. This was no longer about proving anything. This was about letting go. The notes rose and fell with purpose. They told a story of standing back up after being knocked down, of finding light after long darkness, of choosing to move forward even when the path was unclear. People felt it. A man near the front nodded slowly, as if the music had answered a question he had not spoken aloud. A woman pressed her hand to her chest, breathing deeply, steadying herself. The child listening earlier climbed onto the bench beside their parent so they could see better. Their eyes followed the woman's hands, wide with wonder. The piano seemed to glow, not with light, but with presence. Every key pressed carried intention. Every pause felt meaningful. The woman's fingers moved faster now, not rushed, but alive. The melody grew more complex, weaving around itself, rising higher, dipping lower, then rising again. The sound filled every corner. People at the far edges of the space stopped and turned. Someone whispered, "Listen to that." Another replied, "I've never heard anything like this here." The woman did not hear them. Her eyes were half closed now. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, not for show, but because the music pulled her along, brighter. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Hope no longer whispered. It spoke clearly now. The crowd leaned in as one. Phones were forgotten. Time slipped away. The woman's hands moved with strength and grace. Her fingers struck the keys with certainty, then softened again. Controlling the sound with care, she let the music breathe. She let it speak. The station, once full of noise and movement, now felt like a shared space of listening. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, connected by something none of them expected to find that day. The woman reached the heart of the piece. The sound swelled. This was the moment. The place where everything came together. Her left hand held a strong foundation, steady and sure. Her right hand soared above it, carrying the melody with power and emotion. The music surged, filling the space completely. Some listeners gasped softly. Others felt chills run through their arms. The older woman on the bench closed her eyes, tears rolling freely now. She smiled through them, as if the music had given her something back. The man with the headphones stood, frozen, his mouth slightly open. The woman at the piano pressed forward, not holding back. The sound grew richer, deeper, stronger. It carried everything she had kept inside for. Years lost taught resilience, hope. It all poured out through her hands. The melody reached its highest point, bright and bold. The sound rang clear and powerful, echoing off the walls. For a brief moment, it felt like the entire space lifted with it. Then, just as suddenly, she pulled back. The music softened, the volume dropped, the intensity remained. The contrast held the crowd in place. No one moved, no one breathed. The woman slowed her hands, guiding the melody downward with care. The notes became gentle again, but not weak. Calm, assured. It felt like standing at the top of a hill. Looking back at how far you've come, she let a single note ring longer than the rest. It hovered in the air, clear and steady. The sound faded slowly. Silence followed, not the usual kind. Not awkward, not empty. This silence was full. It stretched. No one clapped. No one spoke. The woman's hands rested on the keys. She stayed still, breathing slowly. Her chest rose and fell. For a second, she wondered if she had imagined it all. Then someone inhaled, sharply. Then another. The silence broke. Applause erupted. Loud, sudden, overwhelming. Hands clapped from every direction. Cheers filled the space. People stood taller, smiling, shaking their heads in disbelief. The woman looked up. Startled, her eyes widened. She froze. She had not expected this. She pulled her hands back from the keys and stood slowly. The bench scraped softly behind her. The applause grew louder. Some people whistled. Others wiped their eyes while clapping. The woman placed one hand over her mouth. Her other hand trembled slightly at her side. She looked out at the crowd. Faces stared back at her. With awe, gratitude, respect, she swallowed hard. For a moment, she did not know what to do. Then she bowed her head. Slightly, not a performance bow. A quiet one. A thank. The applause continued. It washed over her like a wave. She felt light-headed, relieved. Seen, the piano sat behind her, silent now. Its job done. The crowd slowly began to settle, though many stayed, unwilling to let the moment end. A woman took one last look at the keys. Her eyes softened. She had found her way back, and everyone there knew they had witnessed something rare. The applause did not stop right away. It rolled through the station in waves, echoing off walls that were used to announcements and noise, not appreciation. Some people clapped until their hands hurt. Others smiled and laughed softly, still trying to understand what they had just experienced. The woman stood there, unsure where to place her hands. One rested over her chest, the other hung by her side. Her heart beat fast, louder than the crowd in her ears. She had imagined many endings to moments like this over the years, but none of them looked like this. She had imagined silence. She had imagined judgment. She had never imagined being seen. Slowly, the applause softened. Not because people lost interest, but because the moment was settling. The cheers turned into warm smiles, quiet nods, shared looks between strangers. Someone near the front spoke up. "Thank you." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Others echoed it. "Thank you, that was beautiful." The woman nodded again, her eyes shining. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Her throat felt tight, full. She pressed her lips together and breathed. She looked back at the piano. For a long time, she had avoided looking at instruments like this. They reminded her of a version of herself she thought she had lost, a version that had time to dream, time to practice, time to hope now. The piano did not feel like a reminder of loss. It felt like a welcome. She reached out and lightly touched the edge again, just as she had before she played. This time her hand did not hesitate. The crowd watched quietly, respectful now. No one rushed her. No one demanded more. A few people stepped forward, careful not to invade her space. One person said softly, "You should keep playing." Another added, "Don't stop." She smiled gently at them. A real smile, not practiced. It surprised her how natural it felt. "I will," she said quietly, her voice barely rising above the room. "Just not right now," they understood. People began to drift away slowly, though many did so reluctantly. Some looked back more than once. Others whispered to each other, retelling the moment as if afraid it might slip away if they didn't hold on to it. A man who had stood with his headphones earlier nodded to her as he passed. "I needed that today," he said. She met his eyes and nodded back. "Me too." The older woman on the bench approached last. She moved carefully, her steps slow but steady. When she reached the piano, she stopped. "That was brave," the woman said. "Thank you for reminding me." The player did not ask what she meant. She felt it. The older woman squeezed her hand gently, then walked away. The station slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Announcements resumed. Footsteps grew louder. Life picked up where it left off. But something had changed. Not in the building, in the people. The woman gathered herself. She took a deep breath and sat back down on the bench, just for a moment. She did not play. She simply sat. Her hands rested in her lap. They no longer trembled. She thought about the years she had spent believing her time had passed, believing that chances belonged to the young, the fearless, the lucky. She had been wrong. The piano had waited, so had she. After a few moments, she stood again. She straightened her jacket and stepped away from the instrument. No one stopped her. No one needed to. She blended back into the crowd as easily as she had arrived. Ordinary, and yet it's changed. As she walked, she noticed small things she had overlooked before. A couple laughing quietly. A child skipping across the floor. The way light filtered through the high windows. She felt lighter. Not because life was suddenly easier, but because she remembered who she was. Behind her, the piano sat in silence once more. To most people passing by later, it was just an object again. Just another piece of furniture in a busy place. But for those who had been there, it would never be just that. They would remember. The quiet woman who sat down without warning. They would remember how the noise faded, how time slowed, how something honest filled the space. Some would tell the story later that night. Others would keep it to themselves, carrying it quietly. A few might even look at their own forgotten dreams differently. The woman exited the station and stepped into the open air. She paused, letting the breeze brush her face. She smiled, not because she had impressed a crowd, but because she had listened to herself. She walked on, knowing she would return to music again. Maybe not in front of crowds. Maybe not for applause, but for moments like that one. Moments when being heard starts with daring to speak, and somewhere behind her, in a place full of strangers, a piano waited for the next person brave enough to sit down. The days that followed felt different. Even though nothing on the surface had changed, the woman returned to her routine, waking early, moving through familiar streets, doing the things that needed to be done. From the outside, her life looked the same. But inside, something had shifted. She noticed it in small moments. When she waited at a crosswalk, she no longer stared at the ground. She looked up. When she passed shop windows, she caught her reflection and did not look away. When silence filled a room, it no longer felt heavy. It felt open. She kept thinking about the piano. Not the applause. Not the crowd. The feeling. The way her hands had remembered what to do, even after all that time. The way the sound had carried something honest out into the open. The way fear had loosened its grip when she finally stopped running from it. At night, she sat at her small table and rested her hands flat on the surface, spreading her fingers as if the keys were still there. She moved them slowly, quietly, feeling the shape of music without sound. She had not owned a piano in years. There had been times when she told herself she did not need one. Times when she said music belonged to another life. But now, that excuse no longer worked. A few days later, she found herself standing outside a second-hand shop. The sign was faded. The window held old furniture, mismatched dishes, dusty frames. In the back, she saw it. A small, upright piano. The wood was worn. The keys were yellowed with age. But it stood straight, patient, waiting. She stepped inside. The shop smelled like old paper and time. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys. One stuck slightly, then released. The sound was imperfect. She smiled. It felt right. While her life moved forward quietly, the moment at the station continued to live on in other ways. Someone had posted a short video online. It was not perfect. The sound was uneven. The picture shook. But the feeling came through. People shared it, not because it was polished, because it was real. Strangers left comments about how it made them stop scrolling, how it reminded them of someone they used to be, how it made them sit in silence for a while. The woman did not know about any of this. She was busy carrying a piano into her living space with the help of a neighbor who asked no questions and expected nothing in return. When the piano was finally in place, she sat down and closed her eyes. The first notes were uneven. Her hands were rusty. She laughed softly at herself. It didn't matter. She played anyway back at the station. The piano still stood, where it always had. People passed it every day. Some walked by without a glance. Others slowed. A few stopped. One afternoon, a teenager sat down and pressed a few keys, then stopped. They looked around, unsure. An older man nearby said, "Go on." The teenager tried again. The sound was clumsy, honest, brave. Something had changed there too. The space felt more open. Less judgment. More listening. The woman returned to the station 1 week later. Not to play, just to pass through. As she walked by the piano, she slowed. Someone else was sitting there now, a stranger. They played a simple tune, hands shaking slightly. The notes were uneven but full of effort. She stopped and listened. She smiled. The crowd around them was small, but patient. She did not step forward. She did not interrupt. She stood back. Part of the quiet circle, just another listener. For the first time, she understood something clearly. The moment had never been just about her. It had been about permission. Permission to try. Permission to be seen. Permission to fail without shame. She continued on her way. Heart steady, that evening she played again at home. The notes filled the small space, bouncing softly off the walls. She played slowly, carefully, letting her hands learn again. There was no rush, no deadline, just time. She began to set aside moments each day. Sometimes only 10 minutes, sometimes longer. Some days the music flowed. Other days it didn't. She showed up anyway, and slowly. The world responded, not with applause, with peace. Months later, someone asked her when she planned to perform again. She paused. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe I already did." They laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. She knew now that moments did not need stages to matter. They needed truth. The piano at the station would one day be replaced, or moved, or forgotten. But the feeling it had created would remain. In the woman, in the listeners, in the quiet courage of sitting down when no one expects anything. And somewhere, in a small room filled with imperfect sound, a woman played on, not to be heard by the world, but because she finally heard herself. Morning light slipped through the window. The woman sat quietly with a warm cup in her hands. The city outside was already awake, but inside her small space, everything felt calm. The kind of calm that comes after something important has settled into place. Days had passed since the moment at the station, yet it still returned to her in pieces. Not as noise or excitement, but as feeling. A deep sense of grounding. Like standing barefoot on solid earth after drifting for too long. She did not replay the applause in her mind. She replayed the silence before it, that breathless pause when the last note faded and the world seemed to hold still. That was the moment that stayed with her. The moment she realized she had nothing left to hide, she went back to her usual routines. Grocery shopping. Short walks. Simple meals. Nothing dramatic changed. But she noticed how she moved through the world. Differently now. She walked slower. She listened more. She trusted her instincts instead of questioning them. One afternoon, she passed a community center she had walked by many times before. A paper sign in the window caught her attention. It advertised open evenings for music and art. Anyone welcome? No experience required. She stood there longer than she meant to. Before, she would have smiled and kept walking. This time she stepped inside. The room was plain. Folding chairs, a few instruments resting against the wall, a couple of people chatting quietly. No stage. No spotlight, no expectations. She felt her shoulders relax. When it was her turn, she did not explain herself. She sat down at the old piano in the corner and placed her hands on the keys. The sound was uneven. The instrument was out of tune. She played anyway. The people in the room listened. Some nodded. Some closed their eyes. Some simply sat still. No one clapped loudly when she finished. They thanked her. It was enough outside that room. Life continued to ripple outward in quiet ways at the station. More people were stopping at the piano now. Not all of them played well. Some barely played at all. But fewer people laughed. Fewer people rushed past. The piano had become something else. A pause. A chance. A reminder. The woman passed through the station one evening and overheard someone say, "Ever since that day, this place feels different." She smiled to herself but said nothing. She did not need credit. She had taken back something far more important. At home. She made space for music again. Not perfectly. Not carefully. Just honestly. Some nights she played until her fingers ached. Other nights, she stopped after a few minutes. Content with a single melody. She no longer judged the sound. She let it be what it was. One evening, she wrote a short note and pinned it near the station piano. It did not include her name. It said only, "If you feel like playing, you already belong here." Watched from a distance one day as someone read it. They hesitated, then sat down. That was enough, the woman learned. Something important over time, that courage does not always look loud, not loud supportive. The woman watched from a distance, unseen, her heart full. She did not need to be recognized to feel connected. She had become part of something larger. At home, she began writing again. Not music at first. Words, simple thoughts, small reflections, things she noticed, things she felt. She wrote about fear and how it shrinks when you stop feeding it, about courage and how it often feels quiet and unsure, about how one honest moment can open a door for many others. Sometimes, she placed these words between the pages of old notebooks. Other times, she shared them with people she trusted. They listened. Life did not become perfect. There were still difficult days. Still moments of doubt. Still times when old habits tried to pull her back into silence. But now, she knew what silence could hold. It could hold music. It could hold truth. It could hold beginnings. One evening, she returned to the station late, when the crowd was thin and the air felt softer. The piano stood alone. She sat down. No one watched. No one recorded. She played quietly, letting the sound fade into the open space. The notes echoed gently, then disappeared. She did not wait for applause. She stood, smiled to herself, and walked away. The moment belonged only to her. As she stepped outside, she realized something important. She was no longer defined by a single day. She was defined by what she chose to do after it, and that choice to listen. To try to begin again would carry her forward. Long after the echoes of that piano had faded from memory, sometimes it looks like sitting down when it would be easier to walk away. Sometimes it looks like allowing yourself to be seen, even if only for a moment, as seasons shifted. The memory of that day softened into something steady. It no longer felt sharp or overwhelming. It felt like a foundation. She carried it with her quietly, the way people carry truths they have earned. One night, she stood by her window and listened to distant sounds drifting through the air. Somewhere, someone laughed. Somewhere, music played faintly. She rested her hands on the window frame and breathed. She was no longer waiting. She was living, and in a busy place, where strangers once expected nothing. A simple piano continued to remind people that sometimes the most powerful moments arrive without warning and stay long after the sound fades. Time continued to move forward, quiet and steady. Weeks passed, then months. The memory of that day at the station no longer felt sharp or surprising. It had softened into something familiar, like a favorite song you no longer play on repeat, but still carry in your heart. The woman found her rhythm again, not just in music, but in life. Her days were fuller now, not because she did more, but because she paid attention. She noticed how morning light changed with the seasons, how silence could feel peaceful instead of empty, how small choices shaped the way a day unfolded. Music became part of her life in a gentle way. She did not chase stages or crowds. She played in her living space, at the community center, sometimes for a few neighbors who stopped by just to listen. Other times she played only for herself, letting the sound fill the room without any purpose beyond being there. There were days when her playing felt clumsy again. Her fingers missed notes. Her timing slipped. In the past, that would have frustrated her. Now, she simply smiled and kept going. Perfection was no longer the goal. Presence was. One evening, after a small gathering at the community center, a young person approached her. They stood awkwardly, hands in their pockets, eyes unsure. "I didn't know you were allowed to start again," they said quietly. The woman looked at them, surprised. "Start what?" she asked. "Anything," the young person replied. "I thought if you stopped, that was it." The woman considered this for a moment. "I used to think that too," she said. "But I was wrong." The words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Back at the station, the piano continued its quiet work. Some days, no one touched it. Other days, someone sat down and tried a few notes, then left. And sometimes, someone stayed. The crowd no longer expected nothing. They expected possibility. People gathered without urgency. They listened without judgment. They learned how to give space. One afternoon, a person with shaky hands sat at the piano and played a tune that barely held together. When they finished, they looked around, embarrassed. Someone clapped, then another. The sound grew.